While everyone watches stock markets crash and currencies collapse, the real crisis is happening in fields you'll never see, and it's already too late to stop it. In July of 2023, something strange began happening in global food markets. Prices were spiking erratically, but the headlines barely mentioned it. CNN was talking about inflation. Bloomberg was discussing interest rates. The Financial Times was analyzing central bank policy shifts. But nobody was reporting that wheat stocks had fallen to their lowest level in 15 years. Nobody mentioned that global rice reserves had dropped below critical thresholds. And certainly nobody was paying attention to the fact that the world's largest fertilizer exporters had cut production by 40%. Economists call this a silent crisis, the slow, invisible collapse of the world's food system. And if history serves as any guide, when societies collapse, it's usually not because of armies or pandemics. It's because of starvation. The Roman Empire lost its grain supply before the barbarians arrived. The Maya civilization struggled with drought before its cities emptied. Every major Chinese dynasty fell amid famine and internal rebellion. The modern food system is a miracle, perhaps humanity's greatest achievement. In 1960, the world fed 3 billion people and frequently experienced famines. Today, it feeds 8 billion, and fewer people go hungry than ever before in history. The Green Revolution, genetically modified crops, synthetic fertilizers, and global supply chains have pushed calorie production to astronomical levels. The average supermarket stocks 40,000 different products, most made from ingredients sourced from around the world. Morning coffee might come from Kenya. Bread could be made from Ukrainian wheat. Fertilizer used on tomatoes might have originated in Russia, but this same system is also a single point of failure. 30% of the world's wheat comes from just 3 countries: Russia, Ukraine, and Canada. Rice, India and Thailand control 50% of the global market. Corn, America alone accounts for 32% of world exports. Soybeans, Brazil and America control 80% of global supply. This concentration isn't accidental. It's the logical outcome of efficiency. Large-scale agriculture drives down costs. Specialization maximizes yields. Global trade ensures the cheapest producers win. But it's also made the system incredibly fragile. A problem in one country can affect supermarket shelves thousands of miles away. And right now, this system is under pressure from multiple directions. When Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, global wheat prices surged 70%. Why? Because Ukraine was the world's 5th largest wheat exporter. When its ports were blockaded, the Middle East and Africa suddenly couldn't access their staple foods. Egypt, Lebanon, Yemen, these countries import 60 to 70% of their caloric needs. A supply disruption means starvation. But here's the interesting part. Ukraine's 2022 harvest season wasn't actually that bad. The problem was transportation. The wheat was in the fields, but it couldn't reach the ports. The Black Sea was surrounded by minefields. Insurance companies refused to cover ships. Russia maintained a blockade on convoys. As a result, 20 million tons of wheat rotted in Ukrainian silos while people in the Middle East and Africa faced hunger. This is a perfect example of modern food system fragility. The problem wasn't production, it was logistics. And logistics depends on geopolitics. But the problem isn't just war. Climate change is completely upending harvest calendars. The predictable weather patterns that traditional agriculture relies on no longer hold. India is the world's largest rice exporter. In 2022, it banned wheat exports due to extreme heat. When temperatures exceed 50 degrees Celsius, wheat heads can't release their seeds. The Indian government halted exports to protect domestic stocks. This was sensible policy. They have to feed their own people. But it created a domino effect in global supply chains. Pakistan lost 30% of its rice fields to flooding. The 2022 monsoon season was the most severe in history. A third of the country went underwater. 33 million people were displaced. 8 million hectares of farmland were destroyed. Pakistan normally exports rice. Now it has to import. This created a demand shock in the global rice market. California cut almond production in half due to drought. Almonds are one of the world's most water-intensive crops. Producing 1 kilogram requires 12,000 liters of water. California supplies 80% of global almond production. When the Colorado River and Sierra Nevada groundwater dried up, farmers had no choice. Trees are being uprooted, fields are being abandoned. And it's not just almonds. California's Central Valley grows 80% of America's vegetables. Lettuce, tomatoes, broccoli, carrots, they all come from here. When the water goes, so does this. Here's what most people miss. A food crisis isn't a food problem, it's a systems problem. Everything is connected to everything else. When corn doesn't grow, it's not just tortillas that become expensive. Cattle go hungry because corn is their feed. 40% of corn produced in America goes to animal feed. This means meat prices rise. When meat prices rise, people buy more chicken. When chicken demand rises, soybean prices increase because chicken feed is made from soy. When soybeans become expensive, vegetable oil producers turn to alternatives, like palm oil. This leads to the destruction of tropical rainforests. Palm oil plantations in Indonesia and Malaysia have destroyed millions of hectares of rainforest over the past 20 years. This accelerates climate change, which leads to more harvest failures. This is called the feedback loop of food inflation. And once it starts, stopping it is nearly impossible. During the 2007-2008 food crisis, a similar cycle led to food riots in 37 countries. The Arab Spring in Egypt began when bread prices doubled. In January 2011, bread lines in Cairo spilled into the streets. The Mubarak government tried to cut bread subsidies. Within 2 weeks, Tahrir Square filled with revolutionaries. 30 years of dictatorship collapsed in 18 days. In Haiti, when rice prices rose 50%, people stormed the presidential palace. The government fell. The prime minister resigned. In Pakistan, military borders were erected because hunger created chaos in border regions. These events weren't isolated, they all stemmed from the same fundamental cause. Food prices exceeded what millions could afford to pay. Now let's look at a less known but far more dangerous factor. Fertilizer. Modern agriculture depends on fertilizer, especially nitrogen fertilizer. In the early 20th century, German chemist Fritz Haber found a way to fix nitrogen from air, the Haber-Bosch process. This made modern civilization possible. Why? Because without fertilizer, soil quickly becomes depleted. A field becomes unproductive after just a few seasons. The Haber-Bosch process increased agricultural yields tenfold. Today, half the world's population is fed by food grown with synthetic fertilizers. But nitrogen fertilizer production depends on natural gas. Converting methane to ammonia requires enormous amounts of energy. And 40% of the world's nitrogen fertilizer comes from Russia and Belarus because they have massive natural gas reserves. When Russian sanctions paralyzed fertilizer exports in 2022, prices jumped 300%. In Europe, farmers couldn't get fertilizer. Those who could were paying astronomical prices. The cost of 1 ton of nitrogen fertilizer went from €200 in 2020 to €1,200 in 2022. For small-scale farmers, this meant bankruptcy. What happens when farmers don't use fertilizer? In the first year, crops drop 30%. In the second year, soil becomes depleted, and crops fall 50%. By the third year, harvests become nearly impossible because soil can't produce protein without nitrogen. Without protein, plants can't grow. This is happening right now in Eastern Europe. Farmers in Poland and Romania are planting less because they can't get fertilizer. German farmers are reducing their acreage because they can't cover costs. In France, wheat planting has fallen to its lowest level in a decade. The result? Europe's breadbasket is shrinking. Europe is normally a food exporting continent, but in 2023, it became a net importer for the first time. Then there's water, perhaps the most overlooked crisis. California's Central Valley grows 80% of America's vegetables. But the Colorado River feeds 40 million people and millions of acres of farmland, and it's drying up. Lake Mead is at its lowest level since the 1930s. The Hoover Dam is preparing to cut hydroelectric generation because water levels have dropped below critical thresholds. Las Vegas is implementing water restrictions. Arizona farmers have lost 20% of their water allocations. California farmers are pumping water from 300 meters underground, an unsustainable method. In Southeast Asia, the Mekong Delta, Vietnam's rice heartland, is struggling with saltwater intrusion. As sea levels rise, freshwater agricultural land is becoming saline. Rice doesn't grow in salt water. Vietnam is the world's third largest rice exporter. The Mekong Delta provides 50% of Vietnam's rice production. If salt intrusion continues, this production will be lost, and Vietnam has a population of 100 million. If they can't grow rice, they won't be able to feed themselves, let alone export. In the Middle East, the situation is even more dire. Yemen is already in the midst of a water crisis. The capital, Sana'a, could become the first major city in history to be abandoned due to complete water depletion. Groundwater levels are dropping 6 meters per year. Population explosion and cot cultivation, a water-intensive stimulant plant, are exhausting reserves. Yemen imports 90% of its caloric needs. When the money runs out, so does the food. Jordan ranks last in the world for per capita water resources. They're buying water from Israel. But Israel itself is experiencing water shortages. They're building desalination plants, but this requires enormous amounts of energy and is expensive. Jordan hosts 10 million people, 2 million of whom are Syrian refugees. When the water runs out, where will these people go? Syria's civil war was partly caused by the worst drought between 2006 and 2010. 1.5 million rural Syrians migrated to cities because their farms dried up. This migration created enormous pressure in Damascus, Aleppo, and other cities. Unemployment exploded, social services collapsed. When the Arab Spring began in 2011, Syria was already a powder keg. The drought was the fuse, war was the match. Here's the economic connection most people don't understand. Food prices aren't just a consumer issue, they're a national security issue. Developing countries spend 50 to 60% of their income on food. In developed countries, this figure is 10 to 15%. In America, the average family spends 12% of income on food. In Egypt, it's 60%. When bread prices double, an American family might have chicken instead of beef for dinner. But an Egyptian family pulls children out of school. They have to cut healthcare. Unemployment rises because consumer spending collapses. Governments respond, usually with price controls. But this always produces bad results. When prices are kept artificially low, farmers stop planting. Why? Because they can't make money. If production costs exceed sale prices, running a farm makes no sense. Farmers abandon fields. Shortages worsen. This happened in Venezuela. The government froze food prices with populist policies. Farmers stopped growing crops. Supermarket shelves emptied. People lost weight from hunger. It was called the Maduro diet. Ironically, the average Venezuelan lost 11 kilograms in 2016-2017. Egypt is caught in this trap. The government subsidizes bread prices, the world's cheapest bread per calorie. But this bread is made from imported wheat. Egypt imports 60% of its caloric needs. When there aren't sufficient foreign exchange reserves, they can't import wheat. In 2022-2023, the Egyptian pound lost 50% of its value. Import costs skyrocketed. The government requested a $3 billion rescue package from the IMF. The IMF demanded subsidy cuts. The government refused because they know that if subsidies are cut, the streets will burn. The result? Breadlines, people queue at 4 a.m., still waiting at 2 p.m. History teaches us that food crises are never isolated. The Great Famine of 1315-1317 devastated Europe and destabilized medieval society. Rain fell relentlessly, crops rotted, people ate tree bark and grass. The feudal order collapsed because lords couldn't fulfill their obligations. Peasants rebelled, chivalric culture disintegrated. The French Revolution followed bread prices reaching astronomical levels. The winter of 1788-1789 was extremely harsh. The harvest was disastrous. Bread prices rose 80%. Riots began in Paris. The Bastille prison was stormed. King Louis Blachand was executed by guillotine. Europe fought for 20 years. The Irish potato famine of the 1840s caused the death of 1 million people and the emigration of another million. 25% of Ireland's population was lost. The reason? A single pathogen, potato blight. The Irish derived 60% of their calories from potatoes. Monoculture, dependence on a single crop, proved catastrophic. And the British government didn't send aid. They said the free market will solve it. It didn't. People died. More recently, the 2011 Arab Spring began when a Tunisian street vendor set himself on fire after food prices rose 40%. Mohamed Bouazizi was 26 years old. He sold vegetables. Police confiscated his stall. They demanded a bribe. Bouazizi burned himself in front of the municipal building. Protests erupted. Within 10 days, Tunisia's dictator Ben Ali fled the country. The wave spread to Egypt, Libya, Yemen, Syria. Regimes fell in 6 countries. 500,000 people died. 12 million were displaced. The drought in Syria triggered mass migration from rural areas to cities and ignited civil war. The 2006-2010 drought was the worst in Syrian history. 1.5 million farmers abandoned their land. In cities, infrastructure collapsed. Unemployment exceeded 30%. The Assad regime provided no aid. When protests began in 2011, the regime crushed them violently. War started, 500,000 died. 6 million refugees left the country. Do you see the pattern? Food crisis, economic collapse, political instability, conflict. This isn't just a historical pattern, it's a template. 3 things are different this time. First, global interdependence. In the 1970s, a local famine was a local problem. Drought in India only affected India. Today, a problem in Ukraine affects bread prices in Egypt. A decision in Russia triggers wheat queues in Kenya. Systems are intertwined. This increased efficiency, but it also increased fragility. Second, climate change. In the past, poor harvests were cyclical. Drought would occur, then recovery. El Niño would come, then La Niña. Systems were resilient. Now, the new normal gets slightly worse each year. Average temperatures are rising. Rainfall patterns are changing. Extreme weather events, hurricanes, floods, droughts are more frequent and more severe. The IPCC, UN Climate Panel, predicts that by 2050, crop yields could fall 10 to 25%. For billions of people, this means disaster. Third, financial fragility. Many countries are still trying to recover from COVID-19 debt crises. Sri Lanka went bankrupt. Pakistan is on the brink of bankruptcy. Egypt is at the IMF's door. Ghana can't service its debt. Zambia defaulted. These countries have no money for food subsidies. IMF rescue packages require austerity, which means cutting food aid. But when subsidies are cut, people go hungry. Riots begin. Governments fall. So what's coming? In the best-case scenario, governments take this seriously. Strategic reserves are built. Wheat, rice, corn stocks are rebuilt. Investment goes into agricultural research. Drought-resistant crops, efficient fertilizers, sustainable farming techniques are developed. Local food systems are strengthened. Support for small farmers, urban agriculture incentives, food waste reduction programs. International cooperation revives. WHO, FAO, UN World Food Program are funded and strengthened. This is manageable. The technology exists. The money exists. Political will is missing. In the medium scenario, current trends continue. Prices rise, but not rapidly. Developing countries are forced to change diets. Meat consumption decreases. Plant-based protein increases. The middle class experiences declining living standards. Social unrest increases. Protests, strikes, local uprisings. But systems hold. The West turns to protectionism. Food exports are restricted. Poor countries suffer most. Migration waves increase. Europe faces a new refugee crisis. Borders close. In the worst-case scenario, multiple harvest failures occur in the same year. India experiences a massive drought. The Ukraine war intensifies. Russia completely halts fertilizer exports. A major wheat exporter faces climate catastrophe. For example, massive fires in Australia, extreme drought in Canada. Food nationalism spreads. Countries ban exports to protect domestic stocks. Global supply chains collapse. Prices reach astronomical levels. Hunger hits large parts of Africa and Asia. Migration becomes uncontrollable. Border wars begin. Civil wars erupt. In many parts of the world, state authority collapses. This isn't just theoretical. When Russia banned wheat exports in 2010, the domino effect impacted 20 countries. Breadlines in Pakistan, riots in Egypt, famine in Somalia. And 2010 was just one country's export ban. If multiple countries do this simultaneously, if multiple crops fail at once, the system can't handle it. Here's the unsettling truth. The world's food system isn't prepared for this crisis. Strategic reserves are at 40-year lows. In the 1970s, world wheat stocks were sufficient for 90 days of consumption. Today, 60 days. Rice stocks are even worse. Some estimates suggest 30 days. This means there's no margin for error. One harvest loss immediately becomes a crisis. Global governance is in ruins. The post-Cold War order is fragmenting. The Russia-Ukraine war, China-Taiwan tensions, US-China trade wars. The spirit of cooperation is dead. Countries are turning to nationalism. Us-first policies are rising. For food security, this is disaster. Because food is a global problem. No single country can solve this alone. And climate change is accelerating. 2023 was the hottest year on record. 2024 might surpass it. Average global temperature is 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. The Paris Agreement goal was to limit warming to 1.5 degrees. That target now seems unreachable. We're heading towards 2 degrees, maybe 3 degrees. At this level of warming, climate zones, agricultural systems, water cycles will be completely reshaped. Many places will become unfarmable. Tropical regions will be too hot. Polar regions will be warm enough. But the soil isn't there yet. Migration will be mandatory, both for humans and crops. Stock market crashes recover. Central banks lower interest rates and markets bounce back. Currencies recover. New economic policies restore confidence. But food crises, they're different. Food is irreplaceable. You can live without an iPhone. You can live without a car, but you can't live without food. Food crises bring down civilizations. Rome didn't fall because of Hun invasions. It fell because it lost its wheat supply. The Soviet Union didn't fall because of ideology. It fell because of economic mismanagement and food shortages. The question isn't, will this happen? The question is, when will it happen, and will we be ready? Because history makes one thing very clear. Societies are always just 3 failed harvests away. And right now, we're at 2. One more, just one more major disruption. And the dominoes start falling. People start lining up for bread. Governments start banning exports. Prices skyrocket. Protests fill the streets. Regimes tremble. And this time, rescue might not come. Because the crisis won't be in one country. It will be everywhere. And the world isn't as cooperative as it used to be. Countries will protect their own borders. Us first means others go hungry. The result will be conflict, migration waves, border wars, internal rebellions, perhaps the collapse of states. This isn't fear-mongering. This is a warning supported by data, trends, and historical examples. The silent crisis isn't so silent anymore. There just aren't enough people listening.